Section 5. Falsification of the referendum of 1946 and elections of 1947. After the war, a referendum and elections were held in Poland. Both the first and second were falsified by the Soviet authorities. Left-wing historian and activist Karol Modzelewski writes, "The results of the 1946 referendum and the 1947 parliamentary elections were shamelessly rigged. Although the elections themselves were held in compliance with pluralism, voters voted not under coercion, but in accordance with their convictions. There was still a legal opposition and non-communist newspapers, and in private conversations people were not afraid to express their opinions. Soon all this changed. Polyphony turned into nationwide monophony. Fear dictated not only words and gestures, but also thoughts and feelings. The spiritual life of society looked like a river bound with ice. Under a thick layer of the ice, something was moving, something was changing there. But who could know what exactly if there were no signs of life on the surface? Only with the advent of the thaw, when the ice began to crack, and then the revolutionary year of 1956 came, it turned out how significant the changes were during that time, which then seemed dead. The technology of election fraud is described in more detail by the book Poland in the 20th Century. Quote, "A group of specialists from the USSR Ministry of State Security, led by Colonel Palkin, arrived in Warsaw. Working in close contact with Gomulka and Beirut, they developed an operation plan to falsify the results of the poll. The popular vote process on June 30, 1946, showed that the majority of voters supported Mykolaichik's party. And further, Stalin was notified that cabinet members from the PPR and PPS decided to correct the alarming results of the survey, that adjustments to the materials will be made not only in the Central Commission, but also in voivodeship and even district commissions. The distribution of seats in the Sejm and the government took place according to a preliminary inter-party agreement and was the result of a strong-willed adjustment of the election results by the communists and socialists. Note: volitional adjustment or strong-willed adjustment only means manipulation, outright deception, and lies. As Trotsky said, whoever holds elections wins them. Polish society turned out to be unprepared for protests after fraud, as for example Ukrainian nationalists did in 2004, after the rigged elections in which Yanukovych allegedly won, but in fact Yushchenko. It follows from this: if you want to win elections that are likely to be rigged by those in power, prepare for the need to hold protests after the elections. And one more interesting point related to the falsification of elections in Poland. The channel Wiecznik Bury, translated as A Herald of the Storm, in the video How Stalin Captured Poland After the Second World War, questions the falsification of elections in Poland in 1947. Thus, the channel justifies the Stalinist regime. It is likely that it is another secret agent from the nomenclatura camp in the left movement. Section 6. The creation of Cominform and the Polish United Workers' Party, PZPR. In 1947, Stalin created the Information Bureau, which was supposed to unite communist parties under the leadership of the Soviet Communist Party. Poland, represented by its leadership, spoke out against the creation of this structure because feared the imposition of the opinion of the USSR leadership. We read, in Skliawska Poreba, the delegation of the All-Union Communist Party Bolsheviks insisted on the establishment, in addition to the printed organ, of the Information Bureau of Communist and Workers' Parties as a coordinating body, in fact, designed to control the activities of the parties participating in the meeting. This was not discussed during the preparation for the meeting, and Gomulka feared the creation of such a structure. He tried to defend a special opinion. After Zhdanov's report, he was even ready to resign from the post of General Secretary of the Central Committee of the PPR. On September 24th, on behalf of the Polish participants of the meeting, Gomulka expressed disagreement with the creation of the Information Bureau. The remaining members of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the PPR did not take a clear position, and at the end of the meeting he withdrew his objections. Gomulka's fears were not in vain. As Wikipedia writes, the Information Bureau was the main instrument of Stalin's policy against Tito's Yugoslavia, who dared not to follow the wake of Soviet policy. And so it was until 1953, that is until the death of Stalin, when the Soviet leadership decided to take steps towards Tito, the Information Bureau was abolished in 1956, and its functions were transferred to the International Department of the CPSU. Just as happened in the GDR, that is German Democratic Republic, in Poland, Stalin insisted on the unification of the Communist Party and the Socialist Party. In this way, the Stalinists hoped to gain public support. For the Socialists of Poland, this unification actually meant the liquidation of their party. Quote, the Communists, with the approval of Moscow, put unprecedented pressure on the leaders of the PPS in the spring of 1948. At a meeting on March 9th of the Inter-Party 6th PPS-PPR, according to Berman, Gomulka made an offensive speech. He accused the leadership of the PPS of being insincere in its fight against the right, not helping the left-wing elements to advance in the party, not fulfilling the agreement with the PPR on a united front in the field of ideological rapprochement and preparing an organic unification of parties. End of quote. The Polish Workers' Party, having united with the Socialists, became known as the Polish United Workers' Party, PZPR. The Communists hoped that through such a formal unification, they would be able to look more decent in the eyes of the Polish society, more Polish. However, even in the United Party, the Polish people continued to see only an instrument of Stalinist policy. In 1948, amid the conflict between the USSR and Yugoslavia, Stalin removed Gomulka from power, who spoke of his own path to socialism. Quote, Gomulka insisted that the ruling party must advocate and defend independence if it wants to have social influence. Stalin did not like this position. The technology for changing power in Poland was as follows. The Soviet leadership was aware of the struggle of various clans at the top of the Polish leadership through its agents in the government. The leader of the opposition clan was summoned to Moscow. Quote, on August 15th, Beirut flew to Moscow and on the night of August 16th had a long conversation with Stalin and Molotov. He formulated the main complaints against Gomulka: conciliation towards the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, a false understanding of the traditions of the labor movement on the issue of independence, a serious right-wing nationalist bias which manifested itself in the spring of 1944. Stalin's consent to Gomulka's resignation and the transfer of the post of General Secretary to Beirut was received. But the decision on this matter, as it was believed in Moscow, should have been made by the PPR. Gomulka, notified of Stalin's position at a Politburo meeting on August 19th, agreed to resign and admit some mistakes, which Beirut had previously been unable to get from him. The mode of functioning of the United Party was reduced to the approval of decisions made at the very top, in fact, by the General Secretary. There were almost no discussions, even in the Politburo. Quote, all party politics became the lot of these highest party bodies, that is fairly narrow group of people vested with almost unlimited power. The direct participation of hundreds of thousands of ordinary party members and lower-level functionaries in the activities of the party and complicity to its policies were transformed into approval and execution of directives from above. Intra-party discussions disappeared. The party adapted to playing the role of a political hypnotist and a whip to suppress dissent. There was a contradiction in such conformism, because the party included the elite of society, meaning creative people for whom free discussion and creative search are necessary. We read, the ranks of the PZPR, quote, consisted of those who are generally considered the elite of society. In January 1953, about 4.5 thousand of its representatives were members of the PZPR. They made up less than 0.5% of all party members, but these were 2,279 scientists and 2,212 writers, journalists, artists, representatives of other creative professions. Moreover, in the early 50s, more than half of Polish writers were members of the PZPR. In 1954, over 30% of the members of the Union of Polish Writers had a party card. The only reason why a person could want to become a member of the PZPR was his ambition, the desire to rise in terms of career. Quote, a ticket as a member of the PZPR opened the way to advancement through the ranks of government, the state apparatus, the economy, and public organizations. More than half of the leaders in industry were members of the PZPR. In the corps of directors, they made up 75%. These people constituted the ruling clan of the party state nomenclatura. They did not possess real power, but only carried out decisions made at the very top. Quote, from such personnel, the executive structure was built, and the Polish corps of bearers of hierarchical power was formed in the center and locally. The possession of power was complemented by the introduction of significant socio-economic privileges for these people, which in conditions of constant shortages of consumer goods and housing strengthened their connection with the established political regime of the country. End of quote. Obtaining privileges as a function of position in the party state hierarchy is not the same as making a profit on capital. The higher the position, the more privileges. However, it was possible to lose these positions, as we saw in the example of leaders of Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. The atmosphere inside Polish society, as in any Stalinist state, was extremely disgusting and rotten. Quote, a clan or interpersonal struggle was often passed off as a dissent from the party. In other words, if you did not please the boss, he would complain about you as a dissident or even as a Trotskyist, and then the person was deprived of all material privileges. We see an example of this in the film Men of Marble, 1977, directed by Andrzej Wajda, when an advanced worker is evicted from a comfortable apartment after he tried to protect a comrade who was being repressed by the Polish security authorities. The Polish ruling party, like its Soviet big brother, pursued a policy of anti-Semitism. This was due to the fact that within the old capitalist society, Jews were oppressed, and therefore there were many Jews among the revolutionaries and communists. Many of them later entered the state apparatus. During the interclan struggle for power, the Polish authorities decided to use the prevailing anti-Semitism within the Polish society to oust Jews from their positions in the apparatus. Quote, almost simultaneously with the struggle against the right-wing nationalist deviation that the group led by Beirut launched, the leading circles of the party showed concern about the national character of the leadership. This was a Polish reflection of the fact that in the 40s and 50s in the USSR and a number of countries of the Warsaw Bloc, A course was taken towards the redistribution of power within the ruling elites in favor of the people of the titular nation at the expense of the Jews who were communists. Very widespread everyday anti-Semitism rose to the level of state policy. Legal prosecutions were organized against Jewish communists. They were turned into conspirators, culprits of difficulties and social tension in the society, and thereby directed the discontent of the lower classes accumulating in the country into a national channel. End of quote. So anti-Semitism is a part of the nationalist policy of the nomenclatura, their weapon in the interclan struggle for power. It is no coincidence that such rebels as Jacek Kuran declared themselves Jews to the police. By this, they wanted to strengthen opposition to the power of nomenclatura.